While researching for my next Jonny Quest review, I ended up gathering an excessive amount of information on werewolves. So I thought, why not create a separate video about these legendary monsters? And that's exactly what I did. This one's going to be a long dive, covering a broad range of topics. If you're interested in specific aspects of the werewolf myth, feel free to use the timecodes posted below to jump straight to the chapter you're looking for. With that said, let's get started. The werewolf is one of the central figures in ancient superstitions. Alongside vampires, witches, mermaids, ghosts and sorcerers, it has existed in human imagination for thousands of years, inspiring fear among both adults and children in cities and remote villages alike. The word lycanthrope, from which the concept of the werewolf originates, literally means wolfman, and comes from the Greek word lycanthropia. Tales of werewolves go way back, even to the time of ancient Rome and Greece. But much like the legends surrounding vampires, the presence of werewolves was most strongly felt in Eastern Europe, where even the mere mention of a vulkodlak would make a peasant turn pale. Unlike a vampire, who rises from the grave to drink the blood of the living, a werewolf is not a being from the other world. It is a purely earthly phenomenon. It seems that the transformation of a person into a werewolf was caused by some affliction that could strike anyone. A bite from a werewolf was believed to infect the victim, but the horrifying symptoms could also appear in someone who was safely at home and had done nothing to deserve such a fate. This belief fueled the wild fear and mass executions of the Middle Ages, where suspected werewolves were burned or executed by the sword. The rage with which people reacted to supposed signs of werewolf traits was terrifying, and primitive trials and mass executions resembled collective hysteria. The full moon was especially feared, as it was thought that lycanthropy struck most frequently during this time. Those struck by the moon discovered their bodies transforming in vile, repulsive ways, making them resemble wolves and behave like them. After undergoing such changes, they prowled the night, attacking anyone in their path. To become a vampire, one must be attacked by another vampire. But lycanthropy could strike any person unexpectedly, with no escape. Neither garlic, wafers, nor crosses could help. According to ancient treatises, a true lycanthrope not only undergoes a physical transformation to resemble a beast, but also experiences mental and behavioral changes. They perceive themselves solely as animals. They lose their individuality, shred their former habits, uncover the darkest sides of their soul. Unlike vampires, werewolves are not restricted to nocturnal activity. Encountering one during daylight could be just as perilous. However, moonlight was considered particularly dangerous. When a full moon shone, and dogs and other wild animals howled in its pale glow, people believed the risk of transformation was at its peak. A person afflicted with lycanthropy underwent rapid transformation. The onset of the episode was often accompanied by a slight chill, which was then replaced by fever. The individual experienced headaches and intense thirst. Their hands would swell and lengthen, and as with those suffering from leprosy, the skin on the face and limbs would become coarse and deformed. Sweating and heavy breathing often accompanied the transformation, which then took a more distinct form. Shoes would begin to hinder the feet, prompting the victim to cast them off, while the toes became bent and claw-like. Their state of mind also changed. They felt uncomfortable and confined indoors, craving to escape outside. Nausea and spasms followed, bringing complete mental derangement. A burning sensation would arise in the chest, and the tongue ceased to obey, leaving the victim capable only of guttural mutterings instead of articulate speech. At this stage, the lycanthrope would shed their clothing and drop to all fours, their torso darkening as it became covered in fur. The soles of their feet toughened, allowing the naked human beast to run over sharp stones and thorns in a way that a normal human with sensitive skin could not. the head would become covered in coarse hair, giving the appearance that the person was wearing a beastly mask. Then, especially during a full moon, the lycanthrope was wholly overcome by a bloodlust that suppressed all other sensations. They would flee into the night, howling at the moon and killing anything that crossed their path. They typically killed like most predators, by biting into the neck arteries. Sated with blood, the lycanthrope would collapse in a forest and fall asleep. By morning, they reverted to human form. Murders at night, and remorse during the day became their dreadful fate. Lycanthropes were always aware of the onset of these changes, but the transformations occurred so quickly that they had to take special measures to prevent exposure. Those with large enough homes hid in secret rooms until they returned to normal. Others, if the episode began at night, fled to the forest to growl and roll on the ground, biting and clawing at tree trunks. It was believed that a true werewolf could physically transform into a real wolf. French, Spanish, and Italian legends include accounts of cases where a simple peasant was often blamed for the deeds of such a beast. Recovery from lycanthropy was rare. The victim was doomed to wander each night until a creature stronger than themselves killed them, or until a silver bullet ended their suffering. Unlike vampires, werewolves could also be killed by ordinary means, but the specially crafted silver bullet was considered the most effective weapon against the monster. This belief persisted in parts of Europe until the 18th century, coupled with the old story that a werewolf could always be identified by the thick, shaggy tail it retained even in human form. Doctors inspecting alleged werewolves would look for it. In many countries, holy water was considered a remedy for the affliction. It was believed that pouring holy water over a suspected lycanthrope would physically burn off the fur and purify the victim. There was also a belief that hiding or burning the clothes of a suspected werewolf would prevent them from reverting to their human form. This superstition was particularly widespread in Eastern Europe and Russia. If authorities learned of a werewolf's existence, they faced a grim fate. At best, they might hope for a swift and painless death, though such mercy was rarely granted. Werewolves were typically subjected to public trials involving torture, followed by gruesome executions, most often burning at the stake. However, old writings taught that apart from those suffering from the curse of the werewolf, there were also voluntary werewolves. These individuals took pleasure in being cruel. Some believed that plants could be effectively used to transform a person into a beast, and between the 15th and 19th centuries, many bizarre concoctions were prepared by those seeking to become wolves. The tale of the first werewolf originates from ancient times. According to legend, Zeus heard rumors that Lycaon, the king of Arcadia, treated his guests poorly. In Greek culture, hospitality was a sacred duty, so Zeus, who amongst others was the god of hospitality, disguised himself and went to investigate. Suspicious of his guest's true identity, Lycaon devised a gruesome test. He killed a prisoner, roasted some parts of his body, boiled others, and served this horrific dish to Zeus. Recognizing human flesh, Zeus revealed his identity in fury, destroyed Lycaon's house, and punished him. Ovid wrote, "Terrified, he fled, reaching the silence of the countryside. He howled, trying in vain to speak. His mouth, now filled with fury, attacked livestock with thirst for blood. Fur replaced his garments. His hands became paws. He became a wolf, but retained signs of his former self. The same grey hair, the same fierce expression, the same glowing eyes and savage rage in his features." In ancient belief, lycanthropy was viewed as a rare but human affliction, especially common in Arcadia, where Lycaon's transformation occurred. Eating the meat of a sheep killed by a werewolf was said to spread the condition, similar to how rabies proliferates in regions with many infected animals. Marcellus of Side, a Greek writer and physician from the 2nd century AD, described the symptoms and treatment for lycanthropy. Symptoms included pale, lethargic appearance, sunken eyes, dry tongue, inability to shed tears, constant thirst, and difficulty gaining weight. Suggested treatment: bloodletting to the brink of unconsciousness, followed by herbal baths and daily washes with whey over 3 days. The treatment was to be repeated as needed. Considering the immense suffering caused by lycanthropy, it is hard to believe that some people might voluntarily become werewolves. Yet according to Pliny the Elder, for certain Arcadians, transforming into a wolf was a type of initiation rite. He wrote, "The Arcadians have a custom of selecting by lot a member of the Antaeus family. The chosen individual is led to a marsh in a specified location. There, after hanging his clothes on an oak tree, he swims across the swamp, journeys to a desolate place, and transforms into a wolf. He remains with a pack of wolves for 9 years, and if during this time he avoids eating human flesh, he can return to the marsh, swim back across it, and regain his human form, though he will have aged 9 years. However, if the werewolf consumed human flesh during this period, the transformation was said to become permanent, condemning him to remain a wolf forever." Despite the vivid details provided by Pliny, most ancient thinkers viewed such accounts of werewolves with skepticism. Even Pliny himself remarked on the gullibility of the Greeks, humorously doubting the practicality of leaving clothing untouched on a tree for 9 years. Meanwhile, in ancient Roman culture, the image of the wolf held a special significance. The Romans believed that the founders of their city, Romulus and Remus, were saved and nursed by a she-wolf. Their enemies disdainfully referred to Rome as the Wolf, a nickname that the Romans took pride in. Every year, on February 15th, Rome celebrated the Lupercalia, a festival so ancient that even in classical times, many of the songs sung in archaic Latin were incomprehensible to listeners. During the Lupercalia, young men from noble families and even high-ranking officials ran naked through the city, playfully striking bystanders with strips of hairy goat or wolf hides. Women, including those of high social status, would deliberately offer their hands for these blows, believing the ritual would ease childbirth or help the childless conceive. Some historians speculate that the cult of the she-wolf may have influenced the Romans to conceptualize werewolves. They referred to such beings as skin changers. The term applied to all creatures capable of transformation, but primarily to wolfmen. The earliest full account of a werewolf story appears relatively late, in the early 1st century AD, while tales of other mythical creatures like Lamias date back to the origins of writing itself. However, as Wolfman legends proliferated, the idea spiraled out of control, feeding a fascination with the merging of human and wolf characteristics. One of antiquity's most famous werewolf stories involves transformation by moonlight. This tale appears in Petronius's Satyricon, which is a satirical and fantastical work. While entirely fictional, the story reflects the beliefs of the time. The story's narrator sets out to visit his lover Melissa in a small village. Travel on Roman roads was perilous due to bandits, wild animals, and possibly werewolves. At an inn, the narrator is relieved to find a soldier who becomes a companion for his journey. Petronius writes, "We set out after the first crow of the rooster. The moon was shining brightly, as if it were daytime. We reached the cemetery. My companion stopped by the graves while I wandered about, singing and counting tombstones. Then, I glanced at him, and he had stripped off his clothes, leaving them by the road. My heart sank. I was frozen with fear. He urinated around his clothing, and suddenly transformed into a wolf. This is no joke, I swear it's the truth. He howled and darted into the forest. At first, I was paralyzed, unsure where I was. Gathering courage, I went to pick up his clothes, but they had turned to stone. I was terrified, but drew my sword and slashed at shadows all the way to my lover's house. Arriving pale and drenched in sweat, I barely composed myself. My Melissa was surprised at my lateness and told me a wolf had attacked their estate, slaughtering all the livestock and drinking their blood. It fled, but was wounded by a servant's spear. The following morning, I hurried back to the place where I had seen him transform. I found only blood. Back home, I discovered my soldier friend in bed, wounded, with a doctor treating a neck injury. Then it became clear. He was a werewolf. From that day forward, I couldn't even eat bread with him. The earliest recorded use of the word werewolf appears in the church laws of King Canute the Great, who ruled between 1017 and 1035. Therefore, shepherds must be called to protect the people from this predator. These are the bishops and priests, tasked with guarding their flock with wise teachings so that the wildly bold werewolf does not cause great harm or bite too deeply into the spiritual flock. Clearly symbolic, this Old English werewolf has its prototype in Scripture. The image of a wolf attacking the flock appears in Christ's Sermon on the Mount. Beware of false prophets, who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. The replacement of the wolf with the werewolf suggests that the figure of the werewolf was viewed as more closely connected to the devil than the mere concept of a wolf, which already evoked images of something predatory and terrifying. In King Canute's church laws, symbolic equivalences are clear. The flock of sheep are Christian parishioners, weakly protected from satanic forces. Shepherds are bishops and priests, tasked with guarding their flocks from devilish schemes. The werewolf is Satan and his army, seeking to destroy the faith of the sheep and doom them to eternal torment. In medieval England, spiritual symbolism persisted. Satan was described as the ultimate source of evil, and werewolves as his enslaved servants. Beyond spiritual texts, werewolves also appeared in narrative works. However, in medieval narratives, the werewolf notably departs from the portrayal given in Greek and Roman myths, or biblical references. They no longer represent manifestations of demonic forces. In medieval stories, werewolves are typically victims of domestic schemes, usually marital betrayal. The scheming wife and her lover often serve as the catalyst for the transformation. For example, the Celtic tale, Arthur and Gorlagon, tells the story of a King Gorlagon who is transformed into a wolf due to his wife's betrayal. She uses a magical wand to curse him, turning him into a wolf. As a wolf, Gorlagon ends up serving King Arthur, who later learns of the curse. With the help of the wand, Arthur is able to restore Gorlagon to his human form. The name Gorlagon etymologically means werewolf, by the way. A similar story appears in Sir Thomas Malory's Le Morte d'Arthur. A significant part of the narrative includes the tale of a knight who is betrayed by his spouse and through magical means is transformed into a werewolf. This event reflects the theme of betrayal, which was a common motif in medieval literature. Meanwhile, in William of Palermo, a prince is transformed into a werewolf by his wicked stepmother and her black magic. The story is a variation on the classic motif of a cursed individual, where the prince suffers a horrifying transformation. What makes this particular version unique is the way it intertwines themes of family betrayal, jealousy, and power. It's worth pointing out that the evil stepmother was a common medieval narrative trope. Stepmothers were often portrayed as antagonists. Let's move from literature to historical reports of what were believed to be actual werewolf attacks. Apparently in the 16th century in France, the number of documented cases of lycanthropy reached its peak. There are dozens of records containing the names of wolf attack victims, along with the dates and locations of the executions of their killers. In 1598, in the Condé region of France, the population was terrified by several gruesome murders. These killings were so bloody that rumors began to circulate about a wolf appearing in the area. Tensions reached a boiling point when a young girl was killed and 3 wolves were reportedly seen near her body. Alarm was raised immediately. Summoning their courage, a group of peasants ventured into the forest to recover the child's body. However, they only encountered a single wolf, which leapt into the underbrush and disappeared. Sometime later, the peasants found a ragged man in the bushes, with a tangled beard, long disheveled hair, and wild eyes. He was apprehended and brought before the magistrate. During interrogation, the man confessed to being a werewolf. He further claimed that the other wolves seen near the dead child's body were his brother and sister, who could transform into wolves using magical ointments. The apparently insane accused was treated with extraordinary mercy for the time. He was sentenced to death, but the Judicial Council in Paris ruled that the madman could not be held accountable for his actions. The sentence was revised, and he was sent to an asylum for the rest of his life. A typical account from the same 16th century describes the astonishing case of a Frenchman who confessed to having communicated with a wolf and taken the form of the creature after entering into a pact with the devil. One Jean Perel, executed in 1518, confessed to judges that he'd killed people after transforming into a wolf. His transformations were facilitated by a special ointment. When the accused described how he prepared it, several people in the courtroom fainted from disgust. It was also believed that Perel lived with female wolves, hiding them in his house. After prolonged torture, the unfortunate man was sentenced to be burned at the stake, and his ashes were scattered to the wind. The late 18th century saw one of the most infamous cases of lycanthropy: the appearance of the werewolf of Bordeaux. This occurred in the Landes region, now a popular tourist destination, but in those distant times, it was a remote and sparsely populated area, well suited for such tales. For some time, the area around the village of Saint-Sever was the site of horrific and mysterious events. Wolves began attacking and often killing people. Matters grew so dire that villagers had to barricade themselves for the night, afraid to step outside. But this offered little protection. The wolf terror continued, striking by day as well as night. Finally, a wolf was captured. Not just a wolf, but a man-wolf. The case was extraordinary. The werewolf turned out to be a boy of about 15 years old, named Jean Grenier, who worked as a shepherd for a wealthy landowner near Saint-Sever. Under questioning by judges, the boy explained that one day in the forest, he encountered a demon who introduced himself as the Lord of the Forest. The demon made him swear an oath of service, and in return, gave him the ability to transform into a wolf. Grenier's youth did not save him. Like most afflicted by lycanthropy, he was sentenced and publicly executed. After his execution, the attacks on people and animals ceased. One of the most infamous werewolves of all time, notorious for his numerous crimes, was Peter Stump. A pamphlet describing his atrocities in Germany over 25 years, and the trial that followed, after which he was tortured and executed in England, became well known throughout Europe. From a young age, Peter Stump was noted for his malicious nature. At his trial, he confessed to committing incest with his daughter and sister, murdering his own son, attacking people and animals, eating their raw flesh, and being repeatedly unfaithful to his wife. He claimed to have made a pact with the devil, who gave him a belt that allowed him to transform into a wolf. The gruesome details of his crimes seemed so implausible that numerous witnesses were required to substantiate them. Their testimonies were compiled into the aforementioned pamphlet. The transcript of Peter Stump's trial can be found in the library of Lambeth Palace, which has been the London residence of the Archbishops of Canterbury for 700 years. This document, which includes illustrations of Stump's torture and execution, serves as a stark warning to anyone tempted to sell their soul to the devil. Let's wrap up this video with a brief recount of the medical explanations behind the werewolf curse. After all, there's often a grain of truth in every legend. So how can we rationalize or explain this particular one? The long history of medicine has produced numerous disease theories, two of which are associated with this condition. Porphyria, a disorder that causes discoloration of the teeth, blistering of the skin in sunlight, and body deformities. And hypertrichosis, in which a person's body is covered with fur-like hair. Today, psychiatrists explain lycanthropy as a result of various mental health conditions, such as schizophrenia, psychotic depressive reactions, dissociative hysteria, manic depressive psychosis, and psychomotor epilepsy. Psychologists specializing in childhood mental illnesses suggest that autism may manifest as feral behavior in children. That's all the werewolf factoids for now. More might come in due time, as there's still a vast area to explore, including the beast of Gévaudan, and serial killers who were nicknamed the werewolf. As always, if you enjoyed the video, please consider leaving a like and a comment. It really helps with the algorithm. See you next time. Bye.